It's 4 p.m. on Wednesday, August 27th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. Now we begin with a report coming out of the U.S. American intelligence officials reportedly have grave suspicions that North Korea is developing a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. This, of course, adds to existing concerns about the missile and nuclear threat posed by the regime. Shin Se-min has our top story.
You're looking at North Korean leader Kim Jong-un sitting atop of a Romeo-class submarine. The photos of Kim surfaced in June when he visited a naval unit of the Korean People's Army and, according to North Korean state media, conducted a drill and instructed the captain on navigation methods. His visit is part of North Korea's efforts to shore up the underwater operation capability of its submarines. And it seems the North is making inroads. U.S.-based media outlet Washington Free Beacon reports that U.S. defense intelligence agencies recently detected a previously unseen missile launch tube on a North Korean submarine. North Korea is reportedly developing a ballistic missile submarine that, if confirmed to be true, would significantly raise the threat posed by the nuclear-armed communist state. According to the report, U.S. intelligence shows Pyongyang is developing a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. North Korea is also believed to have already obtained submarine-launched ballistic missiles from Russia. Pentagon spokesman Jeffrey Poole refused to comment on the report, saying he was not allowed to discuss matters of national intelligence. However, he did say the U.S. urges Pyongyang to be more transparent with its defense activities for the sake of regional peace. If the report is true and Pyongyang has developed its capability, the U.S. will have to look into strengthening its missile defense systems on the West Coast, as North Korea would be capable of hitting Alaska. U.S. bases in Japan, the Philippines, and Guam would also be well within range of a North Korean strike launch from waters in Asia. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The U.S., meanwhile, has dismissed repeated calls by North Korea to halt its regular joint military drills with South Korea. The Pentagon's press secretary John Kirby says the exercises will continue, adding that Washington's alliance with Seoul remains steadfast and ironclad. He then urged Pyongyang to meet its international obligations. The U.S. officials' comments come a couple of days after North Korea's deputy ambassador to the UN said the joint drill was a preparation for a nuclear attack against North Korea and that Pyongyang stands ready to use its nuclear weapons if necessary. And now let's get a quick check on the situation in South Korea's southeastern region, where record downpours have come down early this week. The death toll has risen to at least 12, with the discovery of 4 more bodies in Changwon, Gyeongsangnam-do province earlier in the day. Now, all those found were passengers on an intercity bus that was swept away by fast-moving currents on Monday. Search operations continue for 2 people who remain missing in the disaster, while rail services gradually start to resume normal operations in the area. Now, all of this as more than 240 millimeters of rain fell in the southeast of the country on Monday. That was in just about 3 hours, leading to landslides and flash flooding. The floor leadership of the ruling Tenri Party will hold a second round of meeting with the bereaved families of April's ferry sinking on this Wednesday. The meeting is about special legislation that will set up the details of a special council investigation into the accident. The two sides are expected to focus especially on whether to give the families more say in selecting the list of candidates to lead the investigation. The ruling party has so far rejected the families' demand of having the authority to select related personnel. Now, the passage of the special bill has been stuck in political limbo for more than 3 months now, holding up a slew of other pending bills. The Japanese government is planning on using part of its budget to promote its review of the so-called Kono Statement. Citing Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga, NHK reports Tokyo will spend part of its budget to advertise the cabinet's recent review of the landmark statement, both domestically and internationally. The review conducted by the current Abe administration claims testimonies provided by former sex slavery victims were not solid and that Japan at that time had coordinated with Korea over how to word the statement. The statement was issued in 1993 by then Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono. It acknowledged the Japanese military's involvement in forcing tens of thousands of women, including many Koreans, into sexual servitude before and during World War II. The Korean economy appears to be on its way toward recovery, rebounding from the impact of April's ferry disaster. The index that measures the overall economic outlook of consumers has improved this month, inching closer to the level seen just before the accident. Our economics correspondent Hwang Ji-hye tells us more.
The Bank of Korea says the Consumer Sentiment Index stood at 107 in August, up 2 points from a month earlier. The figure marks a rebound from July, suggesting that Korean consumers might be returning to the spending habits that were dented after April's ferry disaster. The index hovered at around the 108 level in the first 4 months of this year, but dropped to 105 in May following the disaster. The central bank says the improvement was spurred by a widely expected rate cut this month and government stimulus measures that were instituted by an economic team that took office last month. While indications are that consumer sentiment is improving, the August figure is still below the level posted before the ferry tragedy. A new survey from the central bank shows that more than 9 out of 10 companies in the service sector expect the negative impacts of the ferry tragedy to last at least until next month. The monthly index is a gauge of the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans. A reading over 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And a chronic obstacle facing Korean society is its rapidly aging population. To provide a stronger safety net for the growing number of elderly, the government will obligate all companies in the nation to offer their employees private retirement plans in 8 years' time. Now, that's part of the plan announced by Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan following an economic ministerial meeting on this Wednesday. By 2016, all companies with 300 or more employees would be required to subscribe to a retirement pension program, and by 2022, the provisions would extend to all companies regardless of size. Minister Choi said the government would also ease current regulations on retirement pension funds to improve the firm's operating profitability. And adding to the concerns of the aging population is the nation's low birth rate. This problem is worsening by the year, and experts say Korea's super low birth rate will inevitably impact the labor force that could severely limit room for economic growth. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
It's becoming harder to hear the crying of newborns in Korea. The nation's birth rate has been on a steady decline over the past 40 years. Currently, it has the lowest birth rate among the 34 OECD member countries. Last year, the number of newborns stood at 436,500, a near 10% decrease from 2012. This means about 8.6 babies were born among a population of 1,000, the lowest since the year 1970, when the government first began recording population data. The age of pregnant mothers, meanwhile, is getting higher, which is one of the main contributing factors for the country's low birth numbers. Last year, the average age of mothers who gave birth was 31.8 years old, 0.2 year older than the previous year. 1 in 5 of them were aged 35 or older. The Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs says the low birth rate trend will affect the labor force in the long run. The number of able workers between the ages of 15 to 64 is estimated to stand at 37.2 million in 2016 and is expected to steadily decrease to less than 9.5 million people by the year 2100.
The country's labor productivity will greatly fall with the growing rise of the aging labor population as there are less newcomers joining the workforce.
The researcher emphasized the need to come up with comprehensive measures to ease the burdens families face when raising children, particularly policies that would help parents balance work and family life. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
And on to some tech news. Chinese manufacturers have recently been loosening Korea's tight grip on the smartphone market, but apparently it's not just smartphones. A research firm Display Search says 3 Chinese television manufacturers, including Xiaomi and Lenovo, recently released products at extremely low prices, some up to 30% cheaper than similar ones on the market. Xiaomi, for example, is selling a 49-inch ultra-high definition TV for around $650. That's about 4 times lower than similar class models offered by Korea's tech giant Samsung. And going back to smartphones, at least a dozen new spy applications on Android are making users worry about their conversations being tapped. To tackle this issue, Korea's National Police Agency says it has developed its own application, the Poll Anti-Spy Program, which is available free of charge on Google's App Store, detects spying applications and automatically deletes them. Now, the police say to protect the citizens' privacy, they will continue to keep an eye out for the spy applications. And moving on, Korea has many nicknames, one of them being a coffee republic. You are bound to see at least 1 or 2 coffee shops within every block in Seoul, and there's a high chance that it's a Starbucks. The only downside for the consumers could be the price. Our Connie Kim has more.
Look around, and it won't be too hard to find a place to grab a cup of coffee. But none have quite the presence that Starbucks has. Just across the street from where I'm standing is another Starbucks that's quite as busy as this one. There are 284 Starbucks coffee shops located in Seoul. Now that's more than you'll find in New York City, Shanghai, London, or Seattle, where the company was founded. Koreans are also paying more for a cup of joe at Starbucks stores in Korea, an average of $4.85. That's nearly twice as much as customers in the United States pay. For an Americano, the data shows that Korea ranks 6th on the list, behind countries like Poland and Greece. Why are customers in Korea paying so much? Starbucks Korea says different operating costs and cultural factors are the reasons, and adds that using numbers may not be the best way to draw comparisons. When compared with other domestic coffee chains in the country, Starbucks prices are right on average with those found at domestic coffee chains. Regardless of price, the international coffee chain has a loyal set of customers.
There are many items on the menu and a lot of Starbucks stores. They are easy to find, so that's why I continue coming.
I like the brand image, and the stores are clean compared to other coffee shops.
It appears that Koreans, generally speaking, are willing to shell out a little extra for a cup of coffee, no matter where it comes from. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Bringing you the fresh updates from stories breaking in Korea and abroad. We give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul. Every weekday, only on Arirang.
After some 8 ceasefire deals in a 50-day war, Israel and Hamas have agreed on an indefinite truce. Now, it will allow Palestinians in Gaza to begin rebuilding as leaders from all sides prepare to return to Cairo to work out a permanent truce. Our Son Jung-in has this report.
The long-term truce was announced Tuesday after Israel and Hamas agreed to halt fighting indefinitely, bringing an end to 7 weeks of conflict. The truce brokered by the Egyptian government was reached after 2 days of extensive negotiations in Cairo. The terms of the deal appeared to be almost the same as the one proffered at the beginning of the conflict, easing the blockage of Gaza to allow relief supplies and reconstruction materials to pass through. It also extends the fishing limit to 6 nautical miles from 3 nautical miles. Joyful Palestinians poured into the streets to celebrate. However, fighting continued right up until the truce was declared, with 1 Israeli killed and several injured according to its officials, while in Gaza, 2 Palestinian children were reportedly killed in an airstrike. Both sides will likely return to Cairo sometime within the next month to address more contentious issues, including Israel's call for militant groups to disarm and Hamas demands for an airport and seaport in Gaza and the release of Palestinian prisoners. The ceasefire follows at least 8 temporary truces during the course of the conflict that began on July 8th. More than 2,200 people were killed and tens of thousands were left homeless, mostly in Gaza. 손정인, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, a United Nations cargo helicopter has been shot down in rural South Sudan, killing 3 people on board. The UN says the crew were Russian contractors. The chopper crashed near Bentiu, a hotly contested region where government and rebel forces have been fighting since December. The unrest had displaced some 1.8 million people who were receiving food aid from the UN. Now, a spokesman for a state governor said a rebel commander had warned the UN not to fly over that territory last week. The incident came 1 day after the 2 sides agreed to work toward a permanent ceasefire and form a national unity government within 45 days. And in other news, you'd normally assume that electronic cigarettes are less harmful than conventional ones, but the jury's still out on whether they actually are. The World Health Organization has called for stricter measures on e-cigarettes, warning they could pose a health threat. Kim Min-ji has the details.
More and more people these days are reaching for electronic cigarettes as a way to quit smoking.
If you use electric cigarettes, you will smoke less tobacco.
Although potentially less harmful than traditional cigarettes, there are mounting concerns regarding the health risks of e-cigarettes. And the World Health Organization has drawn up a report calling for stricter regulations. It calls for the prohibition on e-cigarette manufacturers from making unproven health claims, such as they help people quit smoking, until there is convincing scientific evidence to support them. The WHO also urges a ban on the use of e-cigarettes in public places until it is proven that exhaled vapor is not harmful to bystanders. The report also says fruit candy or alcoholic drink-style flavors should be prohibited until evidence shows that they're not attractive to teenagers. The report warned that exhaled e-cigarette vapor could increase the levels of toxins and nicotine in the background air and pose a greater threat to teenagers and the fetuses of pregnant women who use the device.
Underlying reasons for regulation are really to impede then the promotion of these products to non-smokers and youth.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a separate report saying that teenagers that have used e-cigarettes were more likely to smoke real cigarettes. The WHO will hold the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control in October and discuss the issue with member states. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Back here in the nation, the latest discovery of nearly 80 Buddhist artifacts on the outskirts of Seoul was revealed to the public last week. They are among some of the finest preserved and historically important pieces related to Northeast Asian Buddhism. Our Song Ji-sun has this report.
At the entrance of a trail leading to summit of Dobongsan Mountain in northern Seoul sits Dobong Sewon. During Korea's Joseon dynasty, which spanned more than 500 years until the late 19th century, Dobong Sewon acted as an institute for educating young scholars and remembering historic ones. This particular institute was dedicated to Jo Gwang-jo, a Confucian scholar who pursued radical reforms in the early 16th century. But recent discoveries at the site have people, historians in particular, looking even further back to the Goryeo dynasty, which ruled most of the Korean peninsula between the 10th and 14th century. A total of 77 Buddhist artifacts from the Goryeo era have been discovered here at Dobong Sewon, a site that functioned as a Confucian academy during the Joseon dynasty. The site, currently being restored, is set to be reopened next year. Among the dozens of artifacts excavated, one very sophisticated piece that's unique to the Goryeo era stands out. It's this Keungangnyeong, a bell used in Buddhist ceremonies during prayer chants. It's the first known piece in which the 4 heavenly guardians and the 5 great kings are engraved on one instrument, a first not just in Korea, but in other Northeast Asian countries where Buddhism has roots. Although these artifacts were found at an institute that was used during the Joseon dynasty, at a time when Buddhism was suppressed to foster Confucianism, they were not hidden or destroyed.
Before transforming into an institute, the site was used as a temple in the Goryeo era. It is assumed that these artifacts were buried as part of a ceremony to pay respect to the Buddha. These were found inside these larger pots, which helped to preserve their original shapes and materials relatively well.
The preliminary report on these artifacts will now be handed over to art historians, who will conduct further studies and look for clues about Buddhist practices during the Goryeo era. 송지선, Arirang News.
If you are an avid fan of classical music, you'd have heard of Korean conductor Jung Myunghoon. Now, he is a legendary figure and apparently is getting back to his roots. Our Im Hyun-hee tells us more.
Maestro Jung Myunghoon is considered Korea's most famous conductor and has garnered world-class status over the years, performing with some of the top orchestras around the globe. He began playing instruments at the age of 5 and made his debut just 2 years down the road with the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra. And over 50 years later, in 2006, he's made his way back to the Seoul Philharmonic as their artistic director and conductor. He and the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra will be making their BBC Proms debut later today. And if he wasn't busy enough, Jung's decided to go back to the piano, the instrument that started it all. Last year, he released his first piano solo album called Jung Myunghoon Piano, which is a short compilation of well-known pieces, including Mozart's variation of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and Beethoven's For Elise. He's called it a lighthearted project, and this year he's set to perform some of the more complicated pieces on his first ever solo piano tour. He'll travel around the country in October for a total of 5 performances that will consist of all 4 Chopin ballads, Brahms' 4 pieces for piano opus 119, along with some other classical masterpieces. Im Hyun-hee, Arirang News.
Good afternoon, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Now today we are finally getting a break from the sun here in Seoul, and we're looking at a cloudy day with a good amount of sun. And while it's back into the 30s here in the capital city, most other regions are on the cooler side due to the recent rain. Now, on and off showers are expected in the southern regions again, and there may be even times when the rain will fall at a rate of 20 millimeters per hour. And rain is also in the forecast for Jeju Island and Bocheol of the provinces in the evening, with chances of thunder and lightning as well. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out at 30 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will top out at 28 and 26 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops to 26, while Dokdo and Mangkeungang tops into the low 20s. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for you now. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with more updates at 6 p.m. Korea time.